North Africa, November 1942. The desert burned with fire and oil. Black plumes of smoke twisted into the orange sky as M4 Sherman tanks crawled across the sand like wounded animals. Their armor, once gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, now glowed red-hot from panzer shells. Inside one of them, Lieutenant Michael Chen tasted iron and dust. His throat was raw from shouting orders through the deafening thunder of tank guns. "Traverse left! 2 o'clock! Fire!" The gun roared, a flash of yellow in the sandstorm. The 75mm shell struck a German Panzer IV and bounced away like a pebble off steel. The return shot came a second later, a streak of light, a thunderclap, and the Sherman's world became flame. Chen's driver was screaming. The loader was gone. The tank's interior filled with smoke and the smell of burning oil. He threw himself through the hatch, rolling into sand, soaked with fuel, his uniform igniting briefly before he smothered it. Around him, the battlefield of Tunisia was an inferno. Dozens of American tanks burned in lines, their turrets twisted and molten. The battle was over before it began. The Germans had range, precision, and armor the Americans couldn't touch. For every Sherman lost, 5 men died. For every Panzer destroyed, 10 Shermans had to sacrifice themselves. That day, Michael Chen watched his battalion of 54 tanks reduced to 9. That night, under a bruised desert sky, he swore that the next time he faced a German tank, he'd have a weapon that could kill it. Detroit Arsenal. Michigan, February 1943, thousands of miles away. In the bitter cold of an American winter, a man stared at a blueprint under fluorescent light. Henry J. Hatch was an engineer, a genius in steel and geometry, a man whose life had become one endless calculation of angles, armor thickness, and ballistic velocity. He ran his pencil along the curved armor plate of a design that didn't yet exist, a tank so large, so heavily armored, it would defy every rule in the Army's manual. The paper said T-95 gun motor carriage, the idea to mount a naval anti-aircraft cannon on a land chassis. Absurd, the generals said, impossible, wasteful, but Hatch wasn't building for the generals. He was building for the men burning in Tunisia. In the corner of his office hung a newspaper clipping, American tanks outgunned in North Africa. He kept it there as a reminder of failure. Every time he read it, his jaw clenched harder. A knock at the door broke his focus. It was Colonel Willis Kittenberger, the head of the Armored Force Board. He had that expression Hatch hated, the half-smirk of a man who'd already decided you were wrong. "Henry," Kittenberger said, "I've seen your new monster. 90 tons? You planning to fight the war on the moon?" "It'll stop a tiger," Hatch said, voice low. Kittenberger laughed. "At 8 miles per hour? Maybe by blocking the road." Hatch rolled up his blueprints. "You wanted armor that survives. I'm giving you armor that wins." The colonel's smile vanished. "You're giving me a logistical nightmare. Do you know how many bridges in France can hold that weight? None. And your precious 90mm gun, that's naval-grade steel. We can't mass-produce it." Hatch leaned forward. "Then we'll build fewer, better, stronger." The colonel sighed, turning to leave. "Dream all you want, Henry, but doctrine wins wars, not dreams." When the door shut, Hatch whispered to himself, "Doctrine doesn't burn alive inside a Sherman, Washington, D.C. War Department, March 1943. The conference room was filled with smoke and arguments. Generals, engineers, and bureaucrats shouted over one another. The charts of destroyed tanks covered the walls, photos of burned-out Shermans beside intact German Tigers. General Leslie McNair, commander of Army Ground Forces, slammed his fist on the table. "We don't need steel giants. We need fast mobile destroyers. Hit and run. That's how you win armor warfare." Another officer rose, his voice sharp. "So with respect, we've tried hit and run. It's just run. Our shells can't penetrate their armor." McNair scowled. "Then get closer." A voice from the end of the table interrupted. It was General Jacob Davis, the only man who'd been quietly studying Hatch's drawings, spread before him. "What if," Davis said, "we stop trying to outrun the Germans and build something that can't be killed?" The room fell silent. McNair's face hardened. "You're talking about that damn Detroit monstrosity." Devers nodded. "The T-95. Hatch says it can defeat 200 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards, McNair snorted. And weigh what, 100 tons? You'd need 4 Shermans to tow it out of a ditch. But it would live, Devers said quietly. And so would the men inside. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then McNair stood, cold fury in his voice. Gentlemen, we win wars by quantity, not by fantasy. I'm killing the T-95 program effective immediately. The order was signed that afternoon, but fate and the war had other plans. Eastern Front, July 1943. Battle of Kursk. German tanks moved like black waves over the fields of Kursk. The world's largest tank battle was unfolding, thousands of armored beasts grinding the earth beneath their tracks. In the midst of it, a new silhouette appeared, sharper, deadlier, thicker, the Panther. Then the Tiger. Soviet anti-tank guns shattered against their armor like rain. Radio intercepts from the Eastern Front reached Washington within days. Reports spoke of a new German supertank, invulnerable from the front, armed with an 88mm gun that could destroy anything on the battlefield. McNair read the reports. So did Devers, so did Hatch. That night, the T-95 file was quietly reopened. Detroit Arsenal, August 1943. The factory floor was a cathedral of noise, hammers on steel, sparks raining from welders, and the metallic heartbeat of America's war industry. In the far end, under a suspended crane, stood something different. Something monstrous, a skeleton of metal, half finished, the first frame of the T-95. Its sides were slabs of armor 8 inches thick. Its gun, a long, sleek 90mm barrel, jutted out like the finger of God. Henry Hatch stood beneath it, grease on his face, exhaustion in his eyes. His team had been working 16-hour shifts for weeks. He knew what was coming from Europe. He'd read the reports. Tiger tanks unstoppable. He'd seen the pictures, entire Allied convoys destroyed by a handful of German vehicles, and he knew what this machine meant. This isn't just a tank, he told his lead mechanic, pointing to the growing hull. It's a message. We can build something that even Hitler fears. The mechanic grinned. Then we better make sure it starts. They worked through the night. Tunisia, September 1943. Michael Chen was back in combat. His new Sherman was fast, reliable, and still useless against German armor. His platoon had been reduced to 3 tanks after an ambush near Kasserine. The Panzers fired first, as always, and their rounds sliced through the Shermans like knives through paper. During a lull, Chen crouched beside his crippled vehicle, writing in a small leather notebook. He'd been doing this since North Africa. Notes on what killed tanks, what saved them, what failed. He wasn't an engineer, but he thought like one now. Armor angle 30 degrees, maybe better chance to deflect. Need more range, need thicker everything. He paused, staring at the horizon where the German tanks had vanished. If they can build monsters, he muttered. So can we. Detroit Arsenal, November 1943, the T-95 prototype stood complete, a behemoth of steel and defiance. When the Army inspectors arrived, they stared in disbelief. It looks like a bunker on tracks, one muttered. Hatch smiled faintly. That's the idea. The trials began. The T-95 moved slowly, painfully slowly, across the test field. The earth shook beneath its weight. It was loud, unwieldy, but unstoppable. Then came the firing test. At 1,000 yards, a target of German Tiger armor plate was raised. Hatch gave the order. Fire! The gun thundered, a single violent sound that echoed across the proving ground. The round hit dead center. The armor shattered, a hole the size of a man's head punched clean through. The observers stood speechless. For the first time, an American weapon had killed a Tiger, even if it was only on a test range. But victory was short-lived. Within weeks, budget cuts and doctrinal resistance returned. McNair again petitioned to shut the program down. Too heavy, too slow, too late. The Army needed Shermans for D-Day, not experimental monsters. On Christmas Eve, Hatch received the telegram. T-95 project classified as low-priority experimental. He sat alone in his office as snow fell outside, staring at the machine that might never see battle. For a moment, he wondered if the generals were right. Maybe this tank was too much, too late. Then he thought of the burned Shermans, of the letters from mothers asking why their sons had died in inferior tanks. He stood and placed his hand on the cold steel of the T-95's armor. "They think you're a failure," he whispered. "But one day, you'll prove them wrong." Outside, the snow kept falling. In Europe, the tigers were gathering, and across the Atlantic, war waited for the weapon America was afraid to build. Detroit Arsenal, Michigan, January 1944. The T-95 sat in silence under the factory lights, a slumbering giant. Dust had gathered on its hull like snow. Its steel glowed faintly orange in the winter dusk, reflecting the dying sun through frosted windows. Henry Hatch hadn't left the workshop in 2 days. He sat at his desk, the telegram still lying there. Project low priority. Funding reduced. His pencil hovered over a sketch of the tank's suspension system, but his mind was elsewhere. He could hear the factory in the distance, Shermans being welded, engines being tested. The sounds of war. But not his war. Not his machine. The door opened. A young engineer, Robert Feldman, stepped inside holding a stack of papers. "Mr. Hatch, sir, we just got requisition orders from Aberdeen. They want the T-95's gun for evaluation. Separate from the chassis." Hatch's head lifted. "Separate?" "Yes, sir. They want to mount it on a lighter platform. Maybe a tank destroyer prototype." He stood, anger simmering beneath his calm tone. "They're gutting her," he said quietly. "Piece by piece." "Orders from Washington," Feldman said, not meeting his eyes. "They're calling it a cost-effective adaptation." Henry exhaled slowly. "Cost-effective," he repeated. "Tell me, Robert, how much is one American crew worth?" The young man didn't answer. "Somewhere in Italy?" February 1944, mud and smoke. That was all Michael Chen remembered. The campaign through Italy was supposed to be a breakthrough. Instead, it was a nightmare of mountains and machine guns. Tanks crawled up roads slick with rain, their engines screaming under the weight of supplies and bodies. Chen's new Sherman was named Gloria. He'd stopped naming them after friends. They died too fast. The enemy wasn't just the terrain, it was the sound. Somewhere out there, in the mist, the Germans had a new weapon. Tank shells were punching through Allied armor at distances that shouldn't have been possible. One night, while repairing the transmission under a tarp, Chen heard it, a distant roar, deeper than any Panzer engine he'd known. Then came the explosions, one after another, precise, devastating. By dawn, an entire American column had been destroyed. Only blackened husks remained. From a captured German map, Chen saw a name scrawled near the site. Königstiger. The King Tiger Berlin, March 1944, underneath a grand chandelier. Adolf Hitler leaned over a model table cluttered with miniature tanks and maps of Europe. Around him, engineers from Henschel and Porsche stood stiff as statues. The Führer's eyes gleamed with feverish intensity. "The Tiger was a step," he said, his voice low and sharp. "But the King Tiger, that will be our hammer of destiny. No enemy will match it. No artillery will pierce it. The Americans build toys, we build gods." He turned to Dr. Owen Aders, chief designer at Henschel. "What is its armor thickness?" 180 millimeters on the front, mein Führer." Hitler smiled faintly. "Make it 200. The more steel, the more fear." "But Führer, do it!" Hitler snapped. "I want them to tremble when they see it." Outside, the snow fell quietly over Berlin, covering a city that still believed it could not fall. Washington, D.C., April 1944, in a smoky conference room. General Leslie McNair lit another cigarette. He stared at the reports from Europe, disturbing ones. The British were losing Churchills. The Russians were reporting catastrophic losses against a new German heavy tank. Across the table, General Devers leaned forward. These are verified encounters. The Germans have a new model. They call it the Königstiger." McNair waved his hand dismissively. "We've heard that before." "This isn't rumor," Devers said. "The Soviets claim even their 122mm shells can't penetrate it from the front." McNair exhaled a cloud of smoke. "Then they should aim for the sides." Devers's tone hardened. "Sir, our men are dying. I have an engineer in Detroit, Hatch, who built something that could match this. We buried it under red tape." McNair's gaze sharpened. "You mean that 100-ton embarrassment?" Devers stood, slamming a dossier on the table. "I mean the only machine that might save lives." For a moment, silence. Only the ticking clock. Then McNair said, "You want to restart Hatch's project? Fine. But you'll do it with your own budget. Not 1 cent from Armored Command." Devers smiled faintly. "Then I'll call it a field trial." That night, orders went out quietly. The T-95 project was resurrected, unofficially Detroit Arsenal, May 1944. The factory roared to life again. The giant gantry cranes moved once more over the sleeping behemoth. Henry Hatch watched as teams swarmed the T-95 like ants, reattaching armor plates and refitting the massive gun. Feldman approached, grinning. "They approved the field trials, sir." 2 months! Hatch felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. He rested a hand on the cold armor. "You hear that, old girl? They're giving you a chance." As the torchlight danced over steel, he thought of the men overseas and the reports of the King Tiger. He'd seen the photographs, 68 tons of armored perfection, sloped plates, an 88mm cannon that could punch through anything. It was the enemy's masterpiece. The Americans needed an answer. And he was building it. Italy. June 1944. Chen's unit was pinned near Anzio. German shells screamed across the plains, hammering the Allied positions. His Sherman took a hit on the turret ring. The gun jammed. The next round would finish them. "Back! Back, smoke cover!" Chen shouted, but his driver was gone. The seat empty, blood on the glass. He kicked the hatch open, pulling himself out just as another shell exploded nearby. The blast threw him into the mud. When he woke, it was quiet. Too quiet. His platoon was gone. In the distance, through the haze, he saw it, a hulking shape moving slowly across the field. Flat, wide, monstrous. The King Tiger. Its gun pivoted lazily, as if the battle was a formality. Chen stared, unable to move. The thing looked invincible. The armor caught the sunlight like burnished bronze. He whispered to himself, "We're fighting gods." Then he remembered something his old instructor had said at Fort Knox. "Every god bleeds, if you hit it right." He crawled toward a destroyed 57mm anti-tank gun. Barely conscious, blood in his eyes. He loaded a single shell. He waited. The Tiger's side turned. For just 1 second, he fired. The shell hit the side armor and bounced off harmlessly. The Tiger stopped. Its turret turned toward him. Chen closed his eyes. The shot never came. A P-47 Thunderbolt screamed down from the clouds, dropping a 500-pound bomb. The explosion flipped the Tiger like a toy. When the dust cleared, Chen was the only man left alive in the cratered field. Detroit Arsenal, July 1944, testing day. The T-95 thundered across the proving ground, its massive tracks crushing everything beneath them. Its engine, a modified Fordgaf V8, roared like an enraged beast. Observers stood behind reinforced glass as the tank rolled toward a series of concrete walls simulating fortified defenses. Range, 800 yards. Hatch called. "Target, 200 mm reinforced plate!" The gun fired. The shockwave knocked dust from the rafters. When the smoke cleared, the wall had a perfect hole through it. Clean, precise, devastating. A colonel turned to Hatch, eyes wide. "My God, what did you load?" Hatch smiled faintly. "Justice," they tested again. And again. The gun never failed. The armor shrugged off every shell they threw at it, but as always, politics intervened. A week later, Hatch received a new memo. T-95 reclassified as engineering experiment, no deployment authorized. He stormed into Devers' office. "They're killing it again!" Devers sighed. "Henry, you've seen the reports. We're preparing for Normandy. Every ounce of steel goes to Shermans, so we keep sending boys to die in tin cans?" Hatch snapped. Devers looked away. "It's not my choice." Hatch slammed the blueprints on the desk. "Then let me take it there myself. Let me prove what it can do." Devers hesitated, then nodded slowly. "One prototype. Field test only. You'll need to keep it quiet." France, August 1944. Chen was alive somehow. His face bore new scars. His eyes, new ghosts. After the invasion of Normandy, his unit was reassigned to the European mainland. Rumors spread among the troops about a new tank. A secret weapon being shipped from the States. They called it the Beast. No one knew if it was real, but one evening, as his convoy passed through Cherbourg, Chen saw something on a flatbed railcar. Massive, silent, covered in canvas. Its tracks were twice as wide as a Sherman's. Its barrel was monstrous. The nameplate on the hull read T-95. He stopped, staring. The engineers nearby saluted it like a monument. He felt a chill. "So it's real," he whispered. Berlin, September 1944, in a bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Hitler examined reports from the Western Front. He was pleased. "See?" he told his generals. "They cannot stop the King Tiger. The Americans send toys. We send fortresses," but one of his officers hesitated. "Mein Führer, intelligence suggests the Americans are developing something similar." A new heavy tank. Hitler's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. They are too pragmatic, too fearful. But if they are, then we shall make ours heavier." He turned to the engineers. "Begin work on the Maus, 200 tons. I want a fortress that no artillery can harm." The room fell silent. Even his generals exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared argue. Germany was crumbling, and Hitler was building fantasies. France, October 1944, the T-95 arrived at the Allied testing grounds near Verdun. Henry Hatch was there to oversee its trials in combat conditions. It was the first time he'd seen Europe, and the first time his machine had touched foreign soil. The soldiers who saw it were in awe. One muttered, "Jesus, that's not a tank. That's a battleship," Hatch simply said. "It's what should have come sooner." As fate would have it, one of the officers assigned to the test team was Lieutenant Michael Chen, freshly returned from the front lines. When he saw Hatch inspecting the machine, he approached curious. "You built this?" Chen asked. Hatch nodded. "She's called the T-95. Armor thick enough to take a King Tiger's punch." Chen stared at it, remembering the roar of the German beast that had wiped out his unit. "Then maybe it's time we punched back." They shook hands. Two men. One who built machines, one who survived them. Neither knew they'd soon test the T-95 not on a range, but in a real battle. Bastogne, Belgium, December 1944, snow. Silence. Then thunder. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. As German armor poured through the Ardennes, Allied lines faltered. The King Tigers led the assault, their 80mm guns roaring through the frozen forests. Among the desperate defenders was a single prototype, the T-95, deployed in secret to support the 4th Armored Division. Inside, its steel belly, Chen commanded once more, his breath fogging the periscope glass. Hatch sat beside him, serving as the engineer observer. Outside, the world burned. A shell slammed into their front armor. A King Tiger's round. It hit, sparked, and stopped. The T-95 didn't flinch. Chen grinned through clenched teeth. It held. "Fire back," Hatch ordered. The gun thundered. Through the scope, they saw the German tank stagger, smoke pouring from its front plate. The King Tiger, the invincible god, was burning. Chen whispered, "Every god bleeds." Bastogne, Belgium, December 1944, when dawn came. The battlefield was silent except for the crackling of burning armor. Snow fell over the wreck of the King Tiger, its blackened gun barrel pointing toward the sky like a monument to arrogance. Inside the T-95, Henry Hatch exhaled shakily. The gauges were still in the green. No penetrations. They had done it. Chen leaned back against the turret wall, helmet in his lap. "We just killed a legend," he said. Hatch nodded. "Improved another." Outside, soldiers gathered around the massive American tank, cheering. Someone chalked Dragon Slayer across its armor. Cameras flashed, but by nightfall, the celebration was over. A messenger from HQ arrived with sealed orders. Immediate recall. Prototype to be returned stateside for evaluation. Chen frowned. "What?" "We just saved this sector." The courier only said, "Higher command's orders." "Keep your mouths shut." Paris, January 1945. The T-95 was hauled onto a flat car under canvas, guarded by MPs as if it were a state secret. Reporters who'd heard rumors of a supertank were told it didn't exist. General Devers met Hatch on the platform. "You did well," he said quietly. "Too well." Hatch's eyes hardened. "They're burying it, aren't they?" Devers sighed. "McNair's people think it threatens the Sherman program. Too costly, too heavy. Washington wants efficiency, not monsters." "So they'll pretend it never happened?" Devers looked away. History has a short memory. Washington, D.C., February 1945, in a Pentagon conference room. Slides from Bastogne flickered on a projector screen. One frame showing the burning King Tiger. Another, the T-95, looming through the smoke. McNair stubbed out his cigarette. Impressive, yes. But imagine shipping that beast across the Pacific. The war's moving fast. We need numbers, not novelties, a colonel objected. Sir, the data shows— Data doesn't win wars, McNair snapped. Logistics does. And just like that, the most powerful tank in the world was struck from the record. Detroit Arsenal? March 1945, back home. The T-95 sat under a tarp again, its armor cold, its gun silent. Hatch walked around it like a priest visiting a tomb. Feldman approached, holding a telegram. Sir, there's been an offer. Aberdeen wants to convert her into a test rig. Hatch took the paper, crumpled it in his hand. A test rig? For what? Bridge-laying experiments, maybe demolition trials. Hatch looked at the tank's scarred hull. She saved lives, and they want to use her for target practice. Bastogne. Months later, Chen remained on the European front through VE Day. The war ended, but the images didn't. The burning forests, the King Tiger's roar, the T-95's thunder. He received a letter stamped classified. Inside was a single line. Your service with Experimental Unit 14T is not to be disclosed. All records sealed. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his journal. Some truths, he thought, survive only in silence. Post-war Germany, 1946 rumors persisted. Allied occupation troops reported seeing a monstrous American tank being loaded onto a freighter in Bremerhaven. Some said it was bound for Aberdeen. Others whispered it was dismantled and buried under the dunes. One story stood out, a final, unauthorized mission. The mission declassified fragments tell of a covert operation in early 45, an attempt to capture a convoy of German scientists fleeing toward the Alps with experimental weapons blueprints. Officially, no such mission existed. Unofficially, two names appear repeatedly in redacted reports, Lieutenant Michael Chen and Engineer Henry Hatch. According to witness accounts, the T-95, repainted in matte black, markings removed, rolled out from a fog-covered depot near Metz. Its crew numbered 4. Its orders: intercept, recover, and destroy any advanced armor technology before it reached the Soviets or the SS. For 3 days, radio silence. Then a final transmission crackled through Allied channels. Convoy sighted. Engaging multiple King Tigers. We'll hold the pass. Static followed. Then nothing. When reconnaissance units reached the site a week later, they found the wrecks of 4 King Tigers and a crater where the T-95 should have been. No remains. No serial plates. Only twisted steel, buried under snow. Aberdeen Proving Ground. 1951A classified inventory report listed a partial hull, heavy assault tank, type T-95, recovered from Europe. Condition: destroyed beyond repair. It was quietly archived, unannounced. Henry Hatch never returned from Europe. Michael Chen's name vanished from military rosters. Washington, D.C., 1962, in a basement of the National Archives. A young historian opened a crate marked obsolete prototypes. Inside lay a single brass plaque, tarnished with age. 95 Super Heavy Tank Program, U.S. Army Ordnance, 1943-45. Built to end the war that no one wanted to remember. He traced the engraved letters and whispered, "What war machine was this?" Somewhere in the quiet hum of the archive, it felt as if the steel answered. Epilogue. Every god bleeds. History remembers what fits on paper. The Shermans won the numbers war. The Pershings entered the museums. The King Tiger became a legend. But in the dark corners of history, in sketches, in burned files, in the unmarked graves of men who built miracles, another story waits, a story of 2 men and a tank that shouldn't have been forgotten. And maybe, under the rust and dust of time, the T-95 still dreams of the day it roared against the gods. Aberdeen Proving Ground. Maryland, September 1968. Rain lashed against the corrugated roof of the storage hangar. Inside, under the flicker of fluorescent lights, Dr. Eleanor Vance ran her hand along a slab of rusted armor, nearly a foot thick, cold as a tombstone. The label stenciled on its edge read simply, T-95, Sample 3, destroyed. She turned to the base archivist, a weary sergeant who had seen too much paper and too little truth. "You're sure this came from Europe?" she asked. "That's what the file says. Found buried near the Moselle in 46. Could have been anything." Vance frowned. "Anything doesn't weigh 100 tons. Washington, D.C. 2 weeks later. The Pentagon's corridors were quieter than usual, the hum of the Vietnam-era bureaucracy drowned under fluorescent fatigue. Vance sat before a review board of grey-haired officers, her folder thick with photographs and testimonies. "This program," she began, pointing to a blurry image of a monstrous tank in snow, "predates our official heavy armor line. The T-95's capabilities exceeded even post-war designs, yet all trace of it vanishes after 1945. An admiral glanced at the papers. "You're chasing ghosts, Doctor. The T-95 was a prototype." Valia. She slid another photo across the table, a grainy satellite image, newly declassified. "Then explain this." The men leaned forward. The image showed the Alps, and a metallic shape half buried in a glacial crevasse, roughly tank-sized, matching the T-95's dimensions. Silence. Finally, a general muttered, "Where did you get this?" "From a KH-4 Corona satellite reel," Vance said calmly. "Taken in 1962. Someone didn't want it catalogued." Bavarian Alps, November 1968. The wind howled through the peaks. A joint American-German archaeological team trudged through the snow, led by Vance, their Geiger counters and metal detectors half buried in frost. She stopped suddenly. Her instruments spiked. "Here," she whispered. They dug for hours. By nightfall, the shovel struck steel. Beneath the ice lay the skeletal remains of a massive hull, its armor pitted and scarred, its barrel bent like a broken arm. On the side, faint but unmistakable, were the words U.S. Army, T-95 Camp Garmisch, Temporary Lab Facility. The recovery took weeks. The tank was airlifted in pieces, each fragment logged, tagged, analyzed. The hull showed multiple penetrations, 88mm rounds, but all from the outside. The crew hatch was sealed shut, welded from within. One technician muttered, "Whoever was inside didn't want to get out." Vance examined the turret interior under the glow of floodlights. Her flashlight caught a small engraving, carved into the steel with a knife. "Every god bleeds," she froze. The phrase matched a line from an old combat diary. Lieutenant Michael Chen, 4th Armored Division, 1944. But that diary was supposed to have been lost in France, Langley, Virginia. December 1968. Vance was summoned to a quiet office without windows. 2 men waited, suits, emotionless, the kind who spoke only in implications. One slid a file toward her. "Dr. Vance, your findings are classified under Executive Directive 13-6. You are to cease all publications regarding the T-95. She stared at them. "You're covering this up, again," the older man sighed. "Some ghosts are better left buried, Doctor. The Cold War is tense enough without resurrecting superweapons." She gathered the papers, her voice steady. "History isn't a threat. Silence is," the man smiled thinly. "History is what we tell it to be." Aberdeen, early 1969. Vance returned home under watch. But she had made copies, photos, transcripts, fragments of blueprints hidden among her research notes. Late one night, she played an old reel-to-reel recording, recovered from a storage locker labeled Project H Static. Then a voice, faint, tired American. "If this reaches anyone, this is Lieutenant Michael Chen. Hatch is gone. The convoy's destroyed. The T-95's still moving, but she's bleeding oil. We're sealing the hatch. Tell them." We were right. The tape ended with the sound of distant artillery. Then silence. Vance sat in the dark, tears streaming down her face. She whispered, "You were right. Smithsonian Institution, 1982. The world had changed. Vietnam ended. The Cold War deepened, and history became politics. In a quiet back room of the Smithsonian, an unmarked crate arrived. Inside were several corroded armor fragments, a burnt nameplate, and a note. "Recovered from classified storage, Aberdeen." No record exists. EV curators displayed it without fanfare, labeling it simply, "Experimental Heavy Tank Armor, 1944-45. Visitors walked past without noticing. But among them, An elderly man with an Asian face lingered longer than most. His hand trembled as he touched the glass. He whispered, "I told you, Henry." They'd never remember us. The name tag on his coat read, Michael Chen. He turned away before the museum guard could see the tears. Epilogue, the ghost in the steel when the Cold War thawed. The archives opened, briefly. Among the released files was a memo, unsigned, dated 1949. The T-95 program demonstrated effectiveness beyond expectation. Its destruction in Europe remains unexplained. Recommend total suppression to preserve post-war doctrine. Future projects to incorporate design lessons under alternate designations, M103, T110E3. Historians now debate whether the T-95's final stand was real or myth, but in the Alpine air, hikers still speak of hearing something under the ice. A deep, hollow echo, like the slow heartbeat of buried metal. Maybe it's just shifting glaciers. Or maybe somewhere beneath the snow, the T-95 still dreams of battle. Langley, Virginia. March 1984. The tape hissed softly in the dark. On the desk before the CIA analyst sat a faded reel labeled Chen Recording, Project H. The sound crackled, faint but distinct. A dying engine, gunfire, and a voice murmuring, "Tell them." We were right. The analyst rewound it, played it again. There was something else, just before the tape cut off. A second voice, lower, rasping, barely audible. "If anyone finds her, don't rebuild the gods." The analyst stopped the reel and leaned back. In the Cold War, gods had taken on new forms, missiles, silos, warheads. And somewhere, deep under the Alps, a forgotten god of steel still slept. Pentagon. Weapons Development Wing, April 1984 Doctor. Eleanor Vance stood before a panel of NATO engineers, her reputation resurrected after years in academic exile. Projected behind her were schematics of a massive turret, angular, low profile, unmistakably influenced by the T-95. "Gentlemen," she said, "you call it the T-110E3, but its DNA, its soul, began in 1943. A colonel shifted uneasily. "You're saying our new main battle tank design is based on a myth?" Vance smiled faintly. "Not a myth. A cover story." She pulled out an old blueprint, edges yellowed and creased. Henry Hatch drew this by hand. His suspension layout, his armor ratios, they're identical to your prototype. A silence hung in the room. Finally, one officer muttered, "So we've been building ghosts," Vance replied softly. "No, you've been repeating history. Moscow, May 1984, across the Iron Curtain. A Soviet intelligence officer watched satellite photos of the new American tank being tested in Nevada." He frowned. "That shape, sloped glacis, narrow hull, not new," his aide nodded. "Resembles the American heavy tank captured near Bastogne, rumor from 45. The officer lit a cigarette. Then perhaps the Americans never buried their monster after all. White Sands, New Mexico, August 1984. The desert shimmered under the heat. A single tank, prototype designation XM-95E, thundered across the dunes, its cannon booming like thunder. Vance stood beside a group of officers, wind tugging at her hair. The machine moved with eerie grace. A descendant of the T-95's power, stripped of its excess, perfected through decades of secrecy, she whispered, almost to herself. "You lived, Henry," one general overheard her. "What's that?" She shook her head. "Just ghosts. Berlin, November 1989, the wall fell." The world shifted. Secrets, once guarded by fear, began to surface. Among the flood of declassified files, a journalist named David Keller discovered references to Operation Iron Shade, a classified recovery effort in 1968 involving a lost super-heavy tank. Intrigued, he tracked down Dr. Vance, now an aging professor living quietly in Maryland. Over tea, he asked, "Was it real? The T-95? The mission? The men?" She hesitated, then opened a drawer. Inside lay a small brass plaque, the edges scorched. T-95 Super Heavy Tank Program, 1943-45. She placed it gently on the table. "Real enough to haunt me for 40 years. Keller asked, "Why hide it?" Vance smiled sadly. "Because the truth wasn't convenient. We built a machine that made us gods, and gods don't need witnesses. Aberdeen Proving Ground, January 1990, under grey skies. A new exhibit opened. Experimental armor, the evolution of power. Visitors admired the early Shermans, the Pershings, the Cold War giants. At the end of the hall stood a lone restored turret segment, blackened, massive, with a faint inscription etched inside. Every god bleeds, no label explained it. No placard gave a date, but sometimes, at night, the guards swore they could hear the faint creak of tracks in the dark, as if something beneath the floor still remembered what it was to move. Eleanor Vance's. Home, March 1991. She woke from a dream of engines. The phone rang, a voice on the other end. Mechanical, old, almost broken. Dr. Vance. This is Michael Chen. Her breath caught. You can't be. I didn't die in the Alps. We sealed the hatch and waited. Hatch didn't make it. They found me weeks later and buried the story. I saw your paper on the T-95. You told it right. She could barely speak. Why call now? Because I'm dying. And you're the last one who remembers. Silence. Then softly he said, promise me something. What? When they dig up the past again. Make sure they remember the people, not the steel. The line went dead. Smithsonian. Present-day tourists shuffle past the displays. Kids climb on the Sherman replica, pointing at the 80mm shells. Few notice the small corner exhibit labeled Unverified Prototype, 1944. Behind the glass rests a single preserved hatch plate, the metal rippled and warped. A faint engraving still visible beneath the corrosion. HH plus MC. Detroit Arsenal, 1944. A janitor polishing the floor pauses, tilts his head. For a moment he thinks he hears a deep, metallic heartbeat echo through the hall. Slow, patient, eternal. Then it's gone. Epilogue. The weight of memory. Every weapon tells two stories. One of the war it fought, and one of the people who built it. The T-95 never made it into history books, but its shadow shaped everything that came after. From Cold War tank design to the philosophy of modern deterrence. Machines remember what men forget. Steel keeps secrets better than paper. And somewhere, under layers of rust and snow, the last of the steel titans still dreams, not of victory, but of being seen. Detroit Arsenal Museum, present day. The rain falls softly over Michigan. Inside the museum, the last visitors drift toward the exit. The hall lights dim, leaving only a faint glow on the armored giants of another age. In the far corner, away from the crowds and school tours, sits a single plaque. Prototype T-95 Super Heavy Tank. U.S. Army Ordnance, 1943-45. Power beyond necessity. No photos, no fanfare. Just a piece of metal too heavy to forget. A small brass tag rests beside it, engraved with two initials, dulled by time. HH and MCA janitor passes by, humming to himself. His reflection ripples across the polished steel. For a moment, it's almost as if the machine is looking back. In that silence, deeper than any engine's growl, something lingers. The ghosts of the men who dreamed it. The echo of an idea too dangerous to celebrate, too human to erase. Somewhere, far beyond the museum's walls, thunder rolls, soft and distant, like a cannon fired from memory.